This is the 5-minute guide to the Pennsylvania-class battleships of the United States Navy. The Pennsylvania class were the third class of super-dreadnought battleships built for the United States, and the second class of the so-called standard battleships, which were a group of progressive designs that were built with the idea of operating together with a similar speed and armament caliber to each other, in order to ensure a more uniform and easier to control battle fleet. The ships would carry the all-or-nothing armor scheme, and represented an incremental improvement over the previous Nevada class. The class consisted of a pair of ships, USS Pennsylvania and USS Arizona, and were armed with 14-inch guns. These were held in 4 triple turrets, a pair super-firing forward, and a pair super-firing at the rear for a total of 12 guns. 22 individual casemate-mounted 5-inch guns made up the secondary battery, and 4 3-inch anti-aircraft guns and a pair of torpedo tubes completed the weapons loadout. As the ships were considerably larger than their predecessors, the Nevada class, they were able to fit a much more extensive underwater protection system against torpedoes and mines. They carried a pair of extra main battery guns, and were also the first class of American battleships to completely embrace the turbine engine as the method of propulsion, considerably later than almost all other navies. Their speed remained the standard 21 knots of American battleships of the period. The main armor belt was up to 13.5 inches thick with a maximum 3-inch thick deck, although this was made up of individual thinner plates which were not as effective as a single plate of the same total thickness. There was considerable opposition to the ships being built. On the one hand, Senator Tillman thought them too weak and expensive. Due to the rapidly increasing size of battleships, he prepared a series of sketch designs that were significantly larger and more heavily protected, but these were not taken up. He would continue in this line of inquiry for the rest of his career, eventually proposing absolute monster ships that would make even a Yamato class think about running away and hiding. On the other hand, the American Congress was, as ever, the enemy of all things sensible and sane. The House of Representatives simply refused to pay for any battleships at all in 1913, although the Senate would allow for a pair to be built. They eventually compromised on one for 1913 and one for 1914, which would become the Pennsylvania and Arizona. In another stunning display of stupidity that is nearly unique to the American Congress, the contract for the battleships supposed to defend and secure America's interests was promptly awarded to the lowest bidder, on a quote that excluded any armament or armor, which I'm given to understand are somewhat important components of battleships. Somewhat unsurprisingly, the costs of this contract overran significantly, and the final cost once the ship's guns and protection were fitted was almost double the original quoted price. Because American dockyards had built ships considerably slower than British and German yards, the Navy Secretary challenged the builders of these ships to set building speed records, but they were unable to do so. However, the Navy Yard given the Arizona was able to catch up on the commercial yard building the Pennsylvania, so that they were launched only 3 months apart despite having been started with a 6-month gap between them. In the First World War, both ships remained on the American side of the Atlantic, in part due to engine problems with the Arizona, and, in part because oil fuel was in limited supply in Britain, and so it was easier to send the earlier coal-burning battleships which could easily be supplied. After the armistice, both ships were sent, with the Pennsylvania escorting the president's transport ship for the peace conference. After the war, both ships were sent to the Pacific and received extensive modernization in the early 1930s. These replaced the obsolete cage lattice masts, increased the elevation of the main battery guns, installed new fire control equipment, added more deck armor, and provided new 5-inch anti-aircraft guns, 8 per ship. Some additional torpedo protection and new engines were also added, which allowed them to keep most of their speed with all the new weight. In the Pearl Harbor attack, the ships suffered very different fates. The unfortunate Arizona was hit by a number of bombs, most of which did some damage but nothing fatal. However, the last bomb hit somewhere in the area of the second turret, penetrated the deck, and detonated the main magazines. This caused the ship to be blown almost in half, killing over 2/3 of the crew. The only bright spot was that the explosion was so powerful it actually blew out the fires on the nearby repair ship Vestal. The ship was completely unsalvageable, and after the superstructure and main guns were removed for scrapping or reuse, the ship was eventually designated a national memorial which can still be visited today. The Pennsylvania had somewhat better luck. Being in dry dock, she could not be torpedoed and suffered only incidental damage despite 2 destroyers in front of her being seriously damaged. She went on to take part in numerous defensive and training operations before being refitted with many secondary guns replaced with dual-purpose 5-inch guns as well as lighter anti-aircraft guns, and being sent out as part of the American fleet's offensive against Japan. Her primary role in this phase of her career was shore bombardment and air defense. She was present at the Battle of Surigao Strait, but due to older fire control equipment and being furthest from the action, she did not engage. Right near the end of the war, she received an overhaul with even more anti-aircraft firepower and new guns barrels, but ironically would then be torpedoed on 12 August 1945 by a Japanese aircraft. Luckily, a pair of salvage tugs were nearby and the extensive flooding was just about brought under control. However, due to the extensive damage and her age, it was not considered economical to repair her, and instead she was used as a target vessel in atomic bomb testing, surviving this to eventually be sunk in February 1948 as a radioactive hazard. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below.